Unfortunately, most of the people who are urging us to do exactly what they say are not doing it in this tongue-in-cheek or accidental sort of way. And the chief among them, the chief offender of this, is Neil Ferguson. This name, it probably isn't going to go in the history books because he's probably going to be written out of the history, but he should, because this is the guy, more than anybody, responsible for the global economic shutdown. This is the guy who came up with the infamous Imperial College model that predicted 2.2 million deaths or more, in the United States from coronavirus. So Neil Ferguson says, if you guys pursue herd immunity, if you guys let the virus run rampant, you don't shut down your businesses, then you're going to have millions and millions of deaths on your hands. You've got to stay in your apartment. Okay, fine. All the governments of the world, including the UK, where he lives, shut down. Then, turns out, Neil Ferguson didn't follow his own lockdown order. Why am I surprised? Neil Ferguson, on at least 2 separate occasions, this is a 51-year-old scientist, broke the lockdown order so that his 38-year-old married lover could leave her home, travel all the way across London, and have a fun time, have a little lockdown and chill with the government scientist. This is right after Neil Ferguson got finished self-isolating for 2 weeks for testing positive for coronavirus. So it wasn't even out of an abundance of caution, I met a guy who had coronavirus, and so I'm going to stay home. The guy was self-isolating after testing positive. And yet people are breaking these orders. Neil Ferguson sort of accepted responsibility. He has resigned from his government position. It's not enough, okay? And as we're seeing more and more scientists and the politicians who are using the scientists being exposed for getting this virus so wrong, you're going to see the excuses pile up. I love Neil Ferguson's excuse, which we'll get to in a second, but it's not just Neil Ferguson. It's other scientists, it's media personalities, it's governors, it's everybody colluding together to try to cover up for this terrible damage that they've wrought. Neil Ferguson accepts responsibility for violating his own order. He says, I accept I made an error of judgment and took the wrong course of action. I have therefore stepped back from my involvement in the government's scientific advisory group for emergencies. I acted in the belief that I was immune, having tested positive for coronavirus, and completely isolated myself for almost 2 weeks after developing symptoms. So you see, it's not a full apology because he's making excuses. Look, I thought I was fine, okay? It's not actually a big deal, but it's a political issue, and you pesky people with your politics keep getting involved in my science, and so anyway, I guess I'll step down. I deeply regret any undermining of the clear messages around the continued need for social distancing to control this devastating epidemic. The government guidance is unequivocal and is there to protect all of us. Oh, okay, then why didn't you follow it? Oh, if I have to hear the phrase social distancing again, once this pandemic is over, I never want those 2 words to be next to each other again, social distancing. We're all repeating these phrases like we're robots. We're all mindlessly repeating phrases. The government's guidance is unequivocal. The government is there to protect us. Beep, boop, beep, boop. Well, clearly Neil Ferguson doesn't believe that because he violated it, which is fine. Okay, admit that you don't think the government guidance is mandatory, necessary for everybody. Admit that much of the science behind this whole response, this whole government reaction, was bunk, was bogus. Admit that your study was wrong, okay? I'll forgive. I don't mind that some scientific expert got things wrong. I don't mind that the government got things wrong. What I really mind is being gaslit about this whole thing and being told to repeat platitudes and being told to repeat scientific certainties that turn out to be not so certain. Another hypocrite on all of this, another guy who clearly doesn't believe what he's saying in another sector of the economy, is on CNN. Chris Cuomo, brother of Andy Cuomo, governor of New York, one of the most famous politicians during the pandemic, telling people to lock down. Chris Cuomo goes on CNN. Now that finally people are starting to push back a little bit, starting to open up, he doubles down in a largely incoherent rant. I pulled out the most coherent parts to try to get to his argument. But you can see increasingly desperate, telling people to stay at home.
Personally, the lesson for me is obvious. My lesson is gratitude. It's my first day back in the office in more than a month. So many of you were so good to me, both in my family and to my family. I'll just say thank you. I will spend my time in this capacity trying to justify the faith that so many of you have put in me. But while my own COVID battle is mostly over, I'm worried that so many seem to think it's mostly over for all of us. And that is just dead wrong. Facts. Case numbers climbing pretty much everywhere. 68,000 plus deaths now. 2 weeks ago, the president said we would have 60,000 deaths, period. Now, his administration is reportedly privately projecting they're going to be 9/11-like death tolls on a daily basis by early June. And yet they want to push reopening? Now look, no one has accused this president of being fact-focused or even read in on any of this. But you don't need him to mislead you. In fact, don't put this on Trump. We are deceiving ourselves.
No, you're deceiving us. You, Chris Cuomo, specifically, not even just CNN. You don't need Donald Trump to deceive you, because I, Chris Cuomo, will deceive you. Do you remember, what was it, a week ago, 2 weeks ago? Chris Cuomo pretended for a month to be isolated and quarantined in his basement of his house because he was diagnosed with coronavirus. And then they filmed this big segment on CNN where Chris was walking up the stairs for the first time and he sees his wife and his kids. He said, "Oh, this is what I've been waiting for. I've just been waiting for this, to see my beloved family for the first time in a month." And then it turns out he had been violating the order the whole time, because he got into an altercation on the street, outside, walking with his family, with a 65-year-old guy on a bicycle who said, "Wait a second, you're the CNN guy. You said you're being quarantined. Your brother is ordering all of the quarantines. What are you doing outside?" And they got into an altercation. This guy was not taking the advice that he was giving you, because there's one set of rules for the scientists, there's one set of rules for the media personalities, there's one set of rules for political elites, and then there's another set of rules for you peasants. Okay, look, it doesn't really matter if Chris Cuomo stays in his basement for 4 weeks. Who cares? Look, his family probably already was exposed to it anyway. It's not that big a deal in their age group. So, he can go out. But you peasant, you dirty person, you nothing, you pleb, you can't go outside, because then that might threaten public health. But everyone else, all the elites get to do it, because, look, they're really clean and meticulous. So just don't worry about that. Don't pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. I love the numbers he gives. He goes, "This is not over. Cases are rising every day." Duh, yeah. Unless the virus just completely stops, unless all time comes to a standstill, there will be more cases tomorrow than the day before, right? Unless nobody gets infected anymore. That's not how viruses work. But that's not the number that we're looking at. We want to look at how, first of all, deaths obviously lag infection rates, but how deaths are moving, how infection rates are moving, then we can see how this virus is going. That's why even some liberal governors are beginning to reopen, because we have no other choice. But Cuomo says, no, don't do it. He gets more desperate the more the rant goes on.
Those are the facts. But there's also fatigue. I've had it. Season's changing. It's getting warm. Want to get back to it. Look at these fools. Fools. I know they want to be out there. Fools. It's not about you. What about the other people? And look, I'm not going to castigate you. That's not my job. I'm not your daddy. But we have to think about this. We are rushing to get back out of want, not just out of need. All right? Beautiful weather does not make for a beautiful reality. Yes, we're tired of bad news. Yes, the government is not doing things it should be. And there's no question that this is all real, but so are the numbers. The relaxing of stay-home orders doesn't mean COVID isn't a problem anymore. In fact, the opposite is the truth. I know I said that already. I'm going to repeat a lot of things because it's not getting through. Things will get worse. I don't care how you reopen.
Okay, Chris, things will get worse. Okay, you bet, buddy. That's why you're castigating all of those fools who are going outside. He has the audacity to call them fools, even though he himself did the very same thing. By the way, when the pandemic was far worse, when it was raging far more than it is right now, did any of you succeed at deciphering exactly what he was saying? Because I couldn't really. he just has these snippets of ideas, and then they kind of go away, and then he realizes he's kind of retreading old ground, but maybe not quite. He says, I know I'm repeating myself, but the reason he's repeating himself is because his argument is very confused, and his argument is very confused because he doesn't know what he's talking about. He tried to make the argument for weeks that we all have to lock down, we all have to quarantine, this is the end of the world, we're going to have 2 million people dead, and then that didn't happen. And then more evidence that that didn't happen beyond just the numbers is Chris Cuomo wasn't believing it himself at the time, and he went outside. But still, for some reason, he doesn't want anything to reopen. Maybe political advantage. Maybe that's why some of these Democratic politicians are so keen on keeping the economy depressed. And then he's got to keep making that argument, but he can't keep making that argument because the evidence is all around us. The rant that he goes on gets even weirder, but we can't play any more Chris Cuomo. I'm not giving him any more of my showtime. But he gets more desperate, and he tries to convince people. By the end of the argument, he tries to convince people that going outside isn't that great. He says at the end, he goes, look, if we reopen, think about what you're giving up. What are you going back to? What, you want to go back to like restaurants and seeing your loved ones and walking outside in the park and on the beach and going to work and earning a paycheck for you? Who wants that? Nobody wants that, because now you get to spend time with family. Your family's going to starve, but you get to spend time with them. They've gotten so desperate that now they're making the argument, what, you want to work and go outside? Why not just live in your little pod for the rest of your life and plug Tiger King into your head and just consume trash media, including CNN, until the end of your days? That's the argument they're making. Why do you have to go outside? This is the argument the left has been making for years now. Why do you have to fly? Why do you have to go on airplanes? Why do you have to drive? Why do you have to work and travel and move? Why do you have to consume products? Why do you have to do any of that stuff? Can't you just work and go to sleep and not really bother anything and let me enjoy nature? And the irony, of course, whether it's often the environmental left making this, whether it's Leonardo DiCaprio or anyone else, it's people who fly on private jets. It's people who go on their own mega yachts. It's people like Al Gore, who has a giant home that could power many, many homes if you divvied it up. The rules never apply to them. And yet they are so willing to emotionally manipulate you, to castigate you, to use Chris Cuomo's word. I mean, it's usually not as blatant as the chief scientist, the most famous scientist in the world on this issue, saying you all have to stay at home, and meanwhile he's slipping his mistress in through the back door. It's usually not quite as obvious as Chris Cuomo saying we've all got to stay home because my brother Andy Cuomo says we've got to stay home. Meanwhile, he's slipping out the back door and going on jogs in Southampton. It's usually not that obvious, but the hypocrisy is always there. If you enjoyed that video, and let's be honest, of course you did. I hope you did. Be sure to hit the subscribe button so everyone wading through the wasteland of YouTube knows that we have the best content out there.